Now, speaking to somebody in the military, you are somebody who defends our freedoms, and thank you for that. One of the things a myth that I want to bust for people, the First Amendment right that we have only protects us from the government. Does not protect you from your private employer. Right? You have the right to be racist and do racist things. And in this United States of America, you have that freedom. You are allowed to hold that belief. That does not mean you get to hold that belief in representing the organization in which you work for. Right? If you want to go be homophobic on a Sunday, God bless you. Do not let that homophobia impact the workplace, because that's when I can hold you accountable. Right? Once you create a hostile work environment, I can now hold you accountable. You do not have a First Amendment right as a representative of said organization, because your First Amendment right stops at the door.
Today on Unfiltered Conversations, I am joined with Christopher, founder of Innovation Unbiased and host of I Know I Belong When podcast. He led and he leads a global belonging in DEI, working at Krispy Kreme and then also the IFF, and then bringing data, stories, and heart to basically how teams develop and actually work. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming here to the show.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. And just for clarification, it is Christopher.
Oh, okay, Christopher. Sorry.
You're good. You're good.
So, when you hear that phrase, I know I belong when, what's the first moment from your life that comes to mind?
Well, you're really flipping the script on me. Okay. So I think the thing that comes to mind for me was when I was in the dance studio or in musical theater in high school is where I really felt like this is where I belonged. It's, being somebody who I was really bullied in high school. And some of it, probably looking back, I probably taunted the police. So I probably got a little more than probably if I just flew under the radar. If anybody knows anything about me, there is no of me flying under the radar by any stretch of the imagination. So bring it on. And so, but where I found my solace was at the dance studio, or when it came time for the spring musical at the high school. That's where I really felt like I just blossomed and could be my authentic self. And, then later in life, when I was going through different career changes, right? Like first I was in agriculture because I grew up on a farm and I thought I was going to be a farmer for the rest of my life, take over the family business. And while I was in college, the farm went out of business and had to make a pivot. And so I went into higher education and I loved every minute of it, but it also was a struggle, right? It wasn't a good fit for my personality. I would say this after I left higher ed and transitioned to corporate world. I would say I love student affairs, but student affairs didn't love me. And I really, I blossomed again when I got into the kind of the corporate side of life. Being able to do the same work, right? If you look at the through line through my work that I have done from the time I was in college to now, it is always about social justice.
Yeah.
Right? It is always about how do I make the world a better place for individuals. For me, I actually got to do the real work when I was in corporate America. And so I did great work when I was in higher education, but I really got to do really, really good work when I got into corporate America and found, a place that I belonged again. And now that I am in my own consulting firm, right? I'm a team of one at the moment. I really know I belong.
I get you. So, you shared you grew up on a farm. I believe it was in New Jersey. Am I correct?
Yes.
What did that environment teach you about dignity, teamwork, and how it gets done and how it's seen?
So a lot. There's actually a lot. So let me talk about teamwork first, and then I'm going to talk about dignity second, because I think those are two very distinct different topics, but they are intertwined. So teamwork, you did not get to eat lunch or you did not get to come in for dinner until everybody else's job was done, right? So if your task was done and you then if we were out in the pepper field or the tomato field and you finished your row, when you got to the end of that row, you looked to see who had the longest to go and you jumped on that row and you started coming to them. And then everybody did the same thing. And then we all finished at the same time. So there was no getting to the end of your row and you sat back and went, "Oh, like, you got a lot of work to do." Like, what? No, everybody worked together, right? Because we were all here for the same task. And for me, that I could remember my first kind of like grown-up job out of grad school. I was working as a residence hall director, and we had an administrative assistant in the office, and I would always go and do my own photocopying. And I actually had to have my boss pull me aside and been like, "Ada needs to do that, right? That's her job." And I was like, "Yeah, but like," she's like, no, you're taking work away from her. And for me, it was, I'm willing to do this is a task I need done for, like, nothing's beneath me, right? No job is beneath me of getting it done. And I felt bad of like, oh, well, like, but what that came to realize is, well, in this environment, everybody has a little bit of a different task to do. Yeah. Right. And by doing the photocopying, actually, unfortunately, the message that I was giving to Ada was that I didn't think she could do the job for me. Right. And so it was a mental shift for me, because I was like, well, like, it's photocopying, like, no big deal. I'm a big boy. I can do it myself. But so it was just a little bit of a different shift. Right. Yeah. And so for me, I think it's about teamwork, right? How are we making sure that everybody's on the same team and that no job is beneath you, right? That's what growing up on a farm taught me to be. I'm not willing to ask my team to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. That is like ingrained in me all the way, even at home. Like, I'm not going to ask my children to do a task that I'm not willing to do. Like, if I'm going to ask them to walk the dog, I'm going to walk the dog. Right? Like, right. Like, we're all going to do this together. When we talk about dignity, I think this is definitely something that else is a through line through my career. And, I talk about like, this is my paid job. Right? This is one of the things I do that brings me an income, but it's also about who I am as a person. And I've told this story on many other platforms, but I think it's something to tell again. So when I was 7 or 8 years old is when I got probably what I can remember as my first real lesson on what anti-racism was about. And so growing up at a farm in southern New Jersey, there was a family from Puerto Rico that would come up and work on the farm every season. And now I'm going to date myself a little bit. This was before you had electronic deposit. And so every Friday, we would have to bring them their paychecks. And they were paper checks in an envelope with their name on it. And we needed to give it to them so we could pay them for their work. And every Friday night, they would be cooking a big meal, right? It's just, that's the culture. Well, and they would invite us in for a meal. Right. And I knew every week we would go in, we wouldn't necessarily be there the entire time, but they wanted to break bread with us, right? Share a meal. And for whatever reason, on that particular Friday, I refused. And I said, we eat over there. And I was pointing to my grandparents' house. That's the homestead, right? We don't eat here. Yeah. We eat over there. Well, my grandfather, somebody who was way ahead of his time on a lot of things, and I could talk a lot about Charlie Bylone and about who he was as a man, and taught me a lot about and instilled a lot into me. And I don't know why I did it, right? I honestly don't. I was 7 or 8 years old. I just I knew we eat over there. Like, but he was like, no, they invited you in for a meal. The only reason we get to eat over there is because of what they do for us, right? Again, nobody's beneath you. No work is beneath you. We would be working in the field just alongside of them. My grandmother, my grandfather would be on their knees picking the vegetables just alongside of them. You know, when I was 7 or 8, I would be putting the boxes together for whatever vegetables we were packing, right? So like I had a task to do. It might not have been the same task they were doing, but I had a task to do. And so we all worked together. So there was no difference. Right? But for whatever reason, you know, I grew up in a society where white man owned the land and people of color worked the land. And we lived in 2 different places. And so being 7 or 8 years old, I didn't understand what racism was, right? Or was I not being racist? But what I did was racism, right?
Okay.
That was a racist act.
Yeah.
I didn't know it at the time, right? But when you think about, right, that's why one of the things I talk about in my work is that there is who is the person and what behavior, right? It's about the behavior change, right? And so my behavior in that moment was racist. It didn't make me a racist, but it was racist, right? And so my grandfather said, Christopher, you are wrong. You are not being appropriate. Now, I don't think that those were his exact words, but that was the message that was being delivered to me, right? Now, when I use that example because I want people to realize that you can make a mistake. It doesn't define who you are as a person.
Yeah.
But now once you are educated and you understand what your actions did and how they made people feel and the impact that they had, and you are aware of your impact, and you choose to do the same thing, then that's when you can be said, you're this. You never made that mistake again.
Yeah.
And I felt awful, right? I felt awful. But I go back to that story all the time of when I was 7 or 8 years old, my grandfather saying, Christopher, you are wrong. And when we talk about dignity of people, no person is beneath anybody. Right? These individuals were coming to work on our farm. We were paying them a wage to do the job that we were asking them to do. No difference.
You're 100% right. Wow. You know, you expressed and defined what dignity and teamwork is for you. And you even shared the story about you working in a corporate setting and the young lady who was doing the photocopying, you know, she had that specific task and job. And now you're a consultant of one. Companies come to you and value your leadership. What's a belief about that leadership that you carry from your childhood that you still lean on today? And what about that belief do you feel that you have to unlearn?
I think for me, the part that I'm still unlearning is it's really hard. Wow, you stumped me, and nobody ever stumps me. And it's okay to be stumped. I think the thing that I'm still unlearning is you don't need to be perfect.
Huge.
And I'm a perfectionist, right? I am somebody who, and it's something that, like, that was instilled again. My grandfather, I'm going to bring him up again. But he would always say to me, it's okay not to be perfect, but if you have the opportunity to make it as close to perfect as possible, do it. Right. So if you find out you made a mistake and it's too late to correct it, just own the mistake. But if you're making a mistake and you have time to correct it, then put in the work to correct it.
Facts.
Right. So there are times when, and there are times I think that I have maybe fallen down on that a little bit where I had the time to correct the mistake. Nobody else knew, right? But I was being lazy. I had other things to do, right? And I've been like, well, I'll just own that mistake later, right? But I think for me, it's something that I worked with my therapist over the last year or so was that I had gotten myself into a place where I was the version of perfect Christopher for other people than myself. And so I needed and still do, right? Still do need to unlearn that it is okay to be imperfect.
Same here, Christopher. You're not wrong in that statement. But goodness gracious, that's something I practice as much as possible. Not practicing making mistakes, practicing being okay with not things looking, I guess, the ideal of perfection for me, especially being a leader of a team of individuals that when I give them a task to accomplish, I have my own expectations and goals of how that's going to be accomplished. And when they don't do it exactly how I think, I should be okay with that process as long as they got to the end result and it's not causing any safety or any issues. So yeah, man, I totally 100% get you. Doing some
Well, and
more
think
research
about
on
when you're leading your team. Think
yeah,
about when you're leading a team, right? And this is something my mom used to talk to me all the time, right? Is when you are now asking somebody else to do a task for you, you have to be okay that they're going to do it their way,
yep,
right? In their version of perfect, right? It may not be your version of perfect, it's their version of perfect.
mm-hmm,
This is where you need to decide on, or not decide on, but how are you being transparent about what you want the result to be? For example, if you tell somebody, paint that wall, and they painted it yellow, but your expectation is you wanted it green, you can't be mad at them because the only task you said to them or the only instructions you said was paint that wall,
yeah,
right?
mm-hmm,
Their version of paint that wall was yellow.
yeah,
Right? So it's about communication. It's about being very clear on what your expectations are. And then what is their framework of freedom, right?
mm,
So what are the, this is what I would tell my team,
yeah,
right? Is look, here is the end result. I am happy for you to figure out how we're going to get there and come to me and say, hey, Christopher, I have this idea that I think would work better, that is going to get us to the end result, but it's going to make the result even better, right?
right,
But here's the end result that we need to get to. And sometimes I would say and sometimes that maybe change the end result. And sometimes it would have been like, hey, that's a fun end result. But then sometimes I would have to say, unfortunately, this is the box we have to work in,
mm,
right? Because of the instructions are coming from higher than me, and this is the deliverable we have to do. We may not like the deliverable, but this is the deliverable that, the ivory tower wants. Um, but what I want to make sure is that my team understands here are the guardrails. And now I've hired you to be really good at your job. And so I don't want to micromanage, right?
yeah,
I don't want to come in and have to be able to give you every step that you need to take, because then
yeah,
why did I hire you?
yeah,
Right. And so I think it's about just making sure that we are giving people the definition of what as close to perfect can be
yeah.
and being very clear on the expectations, and then let them have the freedom to do.
So I do have a question for you. Have you ever
Mhm.
experienced a time where you given someone a task or something to do or whatever as a leader inside a environment and you were like outed because of that situation didn't turn out the way that you probably wanted it to turn out to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a team member who I was really trying to help her be successful,
uh,
and tried and tried and tried. And for whatever reason, she just kept making mistakes. And it got to the point where I said, do you like this job? Like, is this what you want to do? Because you're a really talented individual. You are
mm,
wicked smart, right? I
yeah,
like you as a human,
yeah.
but for whatever reason, you're not being successful and you're making mistakes that are impacting the rest of the team. And I can't protect you anymore, right? Like, I can't, like, your mistakes are becoming so visible, I can't protect you anymore. And so look, I want you to be successful, but you need to decide if you want to, if you want this job, here are the things you need to do to be successful in it, or tell me you
Mm.
don't want this job. So I had that, I like to call it my come to Jesus meeting.
I like that.
And then I said, this was like a Thursday.
Mhm.
And I said, take tomorrow off, right? There's
Mm,
nothing going on tomorrow. Take the day off tomorrow, vacation day. come back to me on Monday with a decision. I'm putting a meeting on our calendar at 9 a.m. on Monday, and I need you to think about this weekend, and I need you to decide on what you want. And if you decide that you want to stay in this job, I want you to tell me what you need from me to be successful and what you are going to do from your side to be successful. But if you don't want this job, tell me. And then we will make an exit strategy so that you can leave with grace. Because
Like that.
you are getting to the point where you're not going to be able to leave with grace. And I want to help you be successful in your career because this was their first job out of grad school, right? And I did not want this to be a bad mark on them because they did really great work for me. But for whatever reason, it was not jiving anymore. They came back on that Monday and they said, I don't want this job anymore. And I went, okay, fair enough. Let's build an exit strategy. I'm going to need you to be in this job until X date. We are going to post your job. And I was ready for her to tell me that, right? On Friday, I had a meeting with my HR partner and I said, okay, we're probably going to be posting this job next week and I need a plan. They wanted me to let her go on that Monday. And I went, no. No.
Yeah.
We had like International Women's Day to get through. I had big events that she was responsible for and no.
Yeah.
And so I was like, and I need a transition period. I need to hire her replacement. I need her to tell her all the tasks that her replacement is going to need to do for her so that she can be set up for success.
Yeah.
And I said to this individual, I was like, look, I'm willing to help you find a new job and be a positive recommendation for you if you follow the exit strategy according to plan. Right? And she did, right? But for me, it was giving her the opportunity to identify that this wasn't the right role for her anymore and help them be successful in their next job. And she is. Yeah. She's wildly successful now. And God bless her. I love her for it. She's an awesome individual. I have a lot of respect for what she brings to the work. But for whatever reason, this wasn't the role that was right for her.
Wow. See, that's really, really amazing. In a sense that you knew how to be an effective, I guess, team member or team lead, right? What do you see in those areas, especially with leaders nowadays, that they get wrong when they treat belonging or being part of a team like a feeling? And what changes would you treat it to get that outcome so everybody can feel responsible in that design process?
Yeah. So I think that there's two parts to the question.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing about leaders, what leaders are getting wrong is just about from leading a team is leaders are not giving kind feedback. And kind doesn't mean necessarily nice, right? Kind is about holding up the mirror and giving people the opportunity to correct themselves. I had a recent boss, who would tell me, Christopher, be cognizant or aware of the shadow you are casting in the organization, the good shadow and the bad shadow, right? Be aware of it. You have a responsibility in the role you sit to have eyes in the back of your head to see what your shadow is doing, right? I don't think leaders are having those type of conversations and are willing to give people feedback before it's too late, right? Because sometimes leaders wait until they are ready to fire the person.
Yep.
To give them the feedback for all the things they did wrong. Yep. And if you would have actually gone a million steps backwards and said, hey, you're making this mistake over here, right? Then you potentially give them the opportunity to change. That was this employee that I exited, right? I was giving her feedback on the constant, but for whatever reason, she wasn't applying the feedback. And then it got to be a point where it was too big. So I think that's where leaders are getting it wrong, is that they're not, don't want to think about when you're training a puppy, right? If the puppy makes an accident in the house, you have to correct the puppy in that moment, because if they pee on the floor and 5 minutes later you see it and you tell them that they did bad, they don't remember that they peed on the floor, right?
Yeah.
So you have to catch them in the act. Right? And say, No, and stop them, right?
Yeah.
Because they need to, oh, wait, I'm peeing here. I'm not supposed to pee here,
Let's be here.
right? But if you saw the puddle and then you went and correct, they're going to be like, why the fuck are you mad at me? I hope I can curse on your podcast. You need to bleep it, bleep it. But like,
No.
why are you mad at me? Why are you mad at me? I don't know why you're mad at me. I'm trying to just give you love, right? They don't understand.
Yeah.
Right. So in some ways, an employee is the same way, right? If you are waiting until the mid-year or the end-year review to tell everybody what they did wrong, well, you didn't give them the opportunity to fix it. And
Yep.
how many more mistakes were they making? Right? That's not kind. That's not kind. And it's also not helping you because you're making your job harder.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So that's one thing. Then you ask the question about belonging.
Yeah.
This is my wheelhouse.
Oh, okay.
So, and you talked about feeling, and you also brought the depth. You also said the word knowing or know, and there's a difference between feeling you belong and knowing you belong. So, Michael, if you were to come to me, we were working in the same organization, and you were to say, Christopher, I don't feel I belong here. I'm going to go, Michael, what? Why? Here's the laundry list of talking points that I have that tells you why you do belong here, right? Because I want to change the way you feel. But if you were to come to me and say, Christopher, I don't know that I belong here, I'm immediately going to go into investigation mode and say, Michael, what happened? What's going on? Who said what? Who did what? Because you came to me with a factual statement. There was something that made you go, this is a concrete, objective statement. And so there's truth to that. Feeling is subjective, knowing is objective. And so my work is to take this belonging, fuzzy, feely, kumbaya, qualitative thing and turn it into something that's objective, quantitative, that we can grab our hands around, right? We can measure it. It becomes a widget instead of a feeling, right? A subjective thing. Also, we can turn it into data that business leaders understand. They understand numbers. They understand ROI. They understand the impact to the bottom and the top line. We can turn those into concrete numbers to say, if we don't get this right, it's going to cost you X millions of dollars. So for me, I focus on I want you to know that you belong. That's why the podcast is called I Know I Belong When. That's why when you look at my definition of belonging, it says is when a person knows their bold, authentic self is welcome, dignified, and loved. Because think about it as think about the frog in hot water. If you put a frog in water and you turn the flame on and you slowly warm the water up, the frog does not know that it's being boiled alive. But if you already have a container of boiling water and you try to throw the frog into the hot water, it is going to jump out. Right? So kind of the same way, if you can make the statement of, I belong here, and somebody does something that makes you change that fact for you or tries to change that fact for you, you are immediately going to know it. You're going to feel it. It's tangible. You can look at it and say, that action is causing me to question if I belong here or not. And we can deal with it in that moment, right? So I want people everywhere, and I want people to feel it into their own self. How do you know you belong to yourself, right? How do you know that you belong to your family? How do you know that you belong to your church, your community center, your school? Name the environment in which you are in, and how do you know that you belong? And if you don't know that, ask the hard questions of why.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing because being in the military, I have asked myself the question, do I belong here? A few times, not that many, but it's always answered by a follow-up situation that drove me to the precipice to answer that question quite abruptly for me. And usually, like you said, when I search myself, it wasn't a feeling, it was a situation. And situations can change if you go to a different department or a place or a base or location. Right? But is the organization itself a bad thing? And for me, I was like, okay, no, the systems were correct in which they organized it. It was just a person who was in charge of the system was using it in a way that was trying to destroy, people's livelihood, right? And that. And you kind of, talked about it when you talked about the belonging formula, in which I think is very, very bold, and which you describe it as. What problem are you trying to solve in, like, I would say, the corporate setting, or I would say in DEI, right? That language that you felt that wasn't being solved when you have a person who wants to who wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, so for me, I started in this work, in this profession, when it was the title of diversity and inclusion. And then we added equity and it became diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then people started adding in the justice term and people added in accessibility.
Yeah.
And everybody had different, acronyms for it. And to be quite honest, we lost the narrative. Right? I had a former boss would tell me, if you are spending time explaining something, you've lost the audience, right? And so we did a lot of trying to explain what DEI is, and people couldn't understand it. Even my mom, right? Love you, Mom. I know you're going to be listening to this. But we've had conversations about this, right? When I first told her what I was doing, she was like,
Yes.
what is this work? Like, and she would tell people what my job was, and people would like look at her sideways, like, what does your son do for a living? And then when I joined Krispy Kreme, I had the opportunity to name the title for myself. And I made the title Head of Belonging. And my mom said to me, it's the first time she understood exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
And when she said it to other people, people knew exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
And here's another interesting fact. I work on a global stage. In a lot of languages, when you are translating from English to other languages or vice versa, take the word diversity, for example. In a lot of Asian languages, especially the languages that use symbols for words, the word diversity, let's take Mandarin, for example. The word diversity in English has about 6 or 7 different translations
Yep.
in Mandarin based on the context of what is around it, right? So I used to work for a company that we would have to translate all our documents into multiple languages, right?
Yeah.
And I had to work with the translation company to say, I would have a Mandarin speaker on the other end review the document and been like, okay, Christopher, they've used the translation of diversity like 3 different ways.
Ways, yeah.
We need to have a consistent way we're translating it. So I had to go back to the translation company and say, this is the translation. Every time you see diversity, this is the translation to use, right? But what that taught me is that we were, again, needing to explain it. We were losing the narrative. Here's an interesting little fact for you. The word belonging in almost every language has the same translation. There is one translation of belonging in every language. It's consistent no matter what language you are in, no matter how it is spoken. The concept of belonging is the same, right? So for me, that was an aha moment and been like, that's what we're solving for. That's what we're trying to get people to understand, is that everybody needs to know that they belong. It is a birthright. It is a birthright. Also, when we're thinking about reclaiming the narrative, it's one of the reasons why in my definition of equity, I say that equity ensures that we achieve merit-based and fair outcomes.
Ooh.
Because what have we been doing all of this time in the DEI space? We have been saying, judge me on the content of my character, not on the color of my skin. That's merit.
Yes.
That is merit. But we were not using the word
Correctly. Yeah. So,
we were not even correctly. We weren't using it.
you what?
If we're honest, and I've had this conversation with many chief diversity officers and folks who held these positions across many organizations. We didn't use the word merit at all in any of our definitions. I don't know why we were afraid of it. I think a little bit that we were afraid of it because the definition of merit, right, was still a white middle-aged male, right, when we look at a success profile, right? But okay, let's reclaim the word. The work has always been about merit.
Yes.
Hell, look at the current administration we have in this country, in the United States. That's definitely not merit. They didn't get their jobs because they're the best person for the job. This is unfiltered conversations, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. That was funny. Hey, you're right.
It's the truth. It might be comical, but it's the truth, right? I mean,
Yeah.
let's just be honest about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and here's the thing. I understand. I can say that as a white guy. I have a lot of privilege as a white guy. And it's one of the reasons why I do this work, right? Because I understand that I live and work in a society that was designed for my success, to make me successful. I didn't create that system. However, my white privilege perpetuates the system. I have a duty, responsibility, and I need to be held accountable to figure out how we're going to fix that system. And so that's my passion, right? How do I make sure that people who do not look like me, who do not have the same abilities, or not necessarily same abilities, that's wrong, the same opportunities that I have had in my life. I know that there were doors open for me because I'm a white guy. I know that. That's privilege. Now, that didn't necessarily mean everything that came to me was easy, but I know that there were doors open to me. One, because of my last name, right? My last name got me places. I know that, but I have a duty to act. And that's why I do this work.
And that is fantastic work, man. Like, and just what you was talking about with belonging. So I've been in an Asian country. I lived in Japan for 7 years. I'm currently in Korea. This is my second time being back in Korea. And I have KGS, or Korean National Workers, work for me. And usually when most of them could speak very good English, but I'm onboarding another Korean national to come work for me. And she's friends with one of my Korean national workers. And originally I said, hey, can you reach out to her and speak in Korean to her and let her know? She's like, oh, she speaks English well. She was thinking about coming over here, but she's kind of nervous and stuff. And she's like, sir, I think you should reach out to her and just send her an email and let her know it's okay to come here and introduce herself and stuff like that. I'm like, okay. And I know, usually Asian culture or just, now I don't want to lump so many different Asian cultures together, but most of them very hospitable. They don't, unless you invite them in, they're not coming. And so I said, okay. So I wrote out in as best as I could in the Korean, I wrote it out in kanji at first because I knew some in kanji, because being in Japan, you have to know kanji, katakana, and hiragana, and then translate according to, which is a beast. So most Asian countries use kanji still. So trying to translate that in kanji, and then she translated it. And she's like, oh, this is very well written. I like this. And then she's like, but you don't want to say this right here. This is informal. You want to say this. This makes it formal and stuff like that, right? And so I say all that to say, I understand that words have such a power, like to convey what you mean or intent, right? And if you don't do it right, you can lose the message.
Yes.
So quickly. And like you was talking about, the word belonging has one meaning and one meaning only in almost damn near every country or every culture that we're in, right? Which is freaking amazing. I will ask this last question for you, because we talked about belonging. What are two or three belonging indicators that you see when we're talking about like signs of trust? Like when you have leaders doing like their annual reviews and, I guess to have them know how to speak appropriately and use those words like what I feel like or truth or understanding, I guess, that narrative.
So I think when somebody's trying to evaluate, do I trust this organization or not? I would say first is what's written. What is in your code of conduct? What is written on your website? What is written in job descriptions? Because what's written gets measured, because it should not be left to, we have an inclusive culture, right? And everybody just knows it, right? And that's passed on from manager to manager, right? Because then when you get a manager who's deciding that they're not going to be inclusive and we want to hold them accountable, what is the document that everybody is working from that says these are the values of our organization, right? So when I'm working with an organization and they want me to come in and say, I don't know, do an unconscious bias training, right? That is so early 2000s anymore, right? But I'm going to use that as an example. I'm going to ask them, I want to see your code of conduct because I want to know what is written on how you are going to hold people accountable for when they are a biased individual. Because if we come in and we train people to identify what bias is, but then you do not have accountability system to hold that person accountable, then you're not going to do anything with it.
Yep.
Somebody's going to say, hey, this person did this. And you're going to go, okay.
True.
And then you don't have a consistent way that you're holding the person accountable, right? The person who did the biased action is going to say, well, you never told me that this was unacceptable behavior in the workplace, which is true, right? And so one of my past organizations, we wanted to roll out unconscious bias training. And I said, well, we have no accountability system. We have never told somebody that being racist or homophobic or sexist or transphobic or name the phobia, name the ism, was inappropriate in the workplace. We weren't clear. And so, because what we were also finding when somebody would say a racist thing or do this thing or, right? And we would come to been like, that's not appropriate. And they're like, well, you never told me it wasn't. And so we want to hold that person accountable, but we kind of can't because we never told them it was unacceptable. So things we did, wrote it into the code of conduct. We then put the definition of what an inclusive individual joining our organization is into every job description that is posted so that you knew when you were applying to this organization what the expectation was. And then having it in the code of conduct when you join and you sign that piece of paper that says, I have read and understand the code of conduct, not agree. I have read and understood what is in this document. When you take an action that is adverse to the code of conduct and we say, there is no saying I was unclear of what the expectations are to be employed in this organization. Now, speaking to somebody in the military, you are somebody who defends our freedoms, and thank you for that. One of the things, a myth that I want to bust for people, the First Amendment right that we have only protects us from the government, does not protect you from your private employer, right? You have the right to be racist and do racist things. And in this United States of America, you have that freedom. You are allowed to hold that belief. That does not mean you get to hold that belief in representing the organization in which you work for, right? If you want to go be homophobic on a Sunday, God bless you. Do not let that homophobia impact the workplace because that's when I can hold you accountable, right? Once you create a hostile work environment, I can now hold you accountable. You do not have a First Amendment right as a representative of said organization because your First Amendment right stops at the door. Now, it gets a little murky when your employer is the government. So we got some fine lines we need to weave. But general gist, right? You don't have the First Amendment right to be an asshat in your place of employment. Did I answer your question?
It does. It does. Well, Christopher, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for the questions and just being a wonderful, wonderful guest. And the questions and just the way you just articulate yourself is truly, truly innovative. And I love listening to you. But the floor is yours. Tell us anything you got going on.
What do I have got going on? So I would love for people to come check out my podcast.
Yeah.
I Know I Belong When. You can find it on almost every single podcast platform that's out there. Please do come visit me on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Just look up Christopher Bylone or Innovation Unbiased. Anybody who is looking for somebody to come to their organization and do a program, a talk, a workshop, you name it, that is going to help create your organization, advance their culture of belonging, I'm your guy, right?
Yes.
Love to have a conversation with you. You know, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also send me an email to hi@innovationunbiased.com, and that will get to me. So hi at innovationunbiased.com. Would love to start a conversation with folks to see how I can help advance belonging in their organization.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being on the Christopher for being on the show. An absolute dream. And thank you guys for viewing and watching. Enjoy your day. Peace.